Let's bring in staff writer for The Atlantic and MS Now political analyst Ashley Parker. Ashley, Vance has a 48% disapproval rating in that new poll. Why do you think some Republicans are souring on Vance?
Well, Vance was never particularly popular, even when he was Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate. I was told in my reporting around that time that basically almost immediately after Trump chose Vance as his number two, that he regretted the decision. Vance was not sort of as skilled on the campaign trail at retail politics as Trump had been hoping for, although it's worth noting that Vance had an incredibly good presidential debate that sort of earned him back into Trump's good graces. So we're starting at a point where Vance has never been Trump. He's always sort of been a lesser Trump. And then, to be fair to Vance, as vice president, it's a tough role, and you often end up with sort of the detritus of the president. So when Trump is not doing well and his approval numbers are not high, and they're not right now, it is sort of that for this president's number two, but on steroids.
As this MAGA landscape stands right now, who appears to be the stronger candidate, VP Vance or Secretary Rubio, who, again, at one point was nothing like Trump, but has suddenly, warmed up to Trump and his inner circle?
Well, it's a complicated question because Vance is the vice president right now, and that makes him the presumptive nominee if Trump chooses to throw his support behind him. And frankly, whoever Trump chooses to throw his support behind will be the presumptive nominee. But in focus groups that I've had the privilege of listening to, a lot of up for grabs voters, these are voters who voted for Biden and then Trump, don't particularly like Vance. There's something about him they just find off-putting. And of course, they also blame him the way they blame President Trump for the policies that they don't like, for high prices. He sort of owns all of that along with the president. And they do talk incredibly positively about Marco Rubio. And you also see this among Republican operatives and the donor class. And one thing someone pointed out to me that seems sort of funny and trivial, but I think might have some truth to it is, that meme of Marco Rubio sitting on the couch in the Oval Office where he just keeps on taking on new jobs, right? He's leading Venezuela and he's having to single-handedly run the war with Iran and, taking over Cinco de Mayo Day if someone falls down on the job. This has led to this perception that Marco Rubio is highly competent and can kind of do anything. And Trump really likes him. A lot of people in Trump's orbit really like him. But again, Rubio has said publicly that if Vance runs, he will not. So as long as that remains the case, Vance, I guess, has the edge on Rubio in practical terms, but not in terms of who voters and operatives and the donor class and the politierati are most excited about.
Former Trump administration official Matthew Bartlett writes for MS Now, when Trump chose Vance as his running mate, he was distinctly MAGA, a gift from the base to the base and the next standard bearer of the president's new coalition. But while he may now be better known, his core political identity is not. In 2016, he questioned if Trump could be America's Hitler. And then in 2022, he had a road to Damascus political conversion to MAGA. As a political journeyman, no one truly knows what he believes or what beliefs he genuinely holds absent Trump telling him. Ashley, how important is it for Vance to define what he's really about? And what does that look like right now?
Well, again, you're right that there's many iterations of Vance. There's hillbilly elegy Vance. There's law school Vance. There's Vance who was very opposed to President Trump. I will say his MAGA conversion feels pretty complete at this point, but that's not to say he couldn't do another total 180 if he believes that will serve him. But the problem is for better or worse, he owns the Trump-Vance administration and their record. And, you see some tension between them on the war in Iran. Vance is truly ideologically opposed to foreign interventions. He gets this. He comes to it earnestly and honestly by his time in the military. But at the same time, he's not speaking out publicly against this administration. His concerns, he's voicing in a fairly diplomatic way privately. But he understands that he owns the results of that war. And so that's a tough spot to be in for a vice president, because you either own the downside and you can't really say, well, I was privately opposed to that. That will, A, make Trump upset, and he needs Trump's support to succeed him. And that also makes him look fairly ineffective. Well, you were arguing privately against this, and yet ineffectually, it had no result. We still went to war with Iran. Gas prices still skyrocketed. So that's a challenge for him, and that's one of the ways he will have to position himself and define himself going forward.
Just quickly, if you will, some have described MAGA as a cult of personality. What's Rubio's appeal to MAGA?
That we don't know yet, right? I mean, I'm old enough to remember 2016, where not only was Rubio not MAGA, he was very forcefully anti-Trump, and he was sort of the great charismatic hope of establishment Republicans, or as Trump would say, rhino Republicans. Now, Marco Rubio has served Trump loyally in this term, and by all accounts, Trump is very pleased with him. But we'll have to see how much Rubio can make that link with the president, make that MAGA connection, although people do find him very personally likable and charismatic in a way that they do not for Vance.